Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Estate Living, to our Expert Insight series. So as some of you recall, this is our part 2. So the first part of our series, we looked at planning your retirement and what are the various options. So aging at home, a Liferight option, a sectional title option. And now we are taking what was discussed last week and we're putting this into a action plan. So what must be considerations should come into play when deciding on which selection or which lifestyle option you want to take, and how do you plan for that in your retirement. So just before we get going, a little bit of housekeeping, just so that I'm sure many of you have participated in our webinars before, so you are aware of this, but at the bottom of the screen you'll see a little button that says chat. That's where you can pose your questions and we will do our best to tackle them through the course of this webinar. We will also be running a few polls throughout the webinar, which you can then answer. Once you've answered, there's one that's come up on your screen now as an example. You answer and then you can click on the red button in the corner, Tiaan. You can just click on the red button and it'll take it away and out of your line of vision. So to get the best possible information, we needed to speak to the best people. So Tiaan, who's the head of advice from Old Mutual Wealth, has joined us today, and he has taken the information. He's watched the webinar that we had last week. He's taken all of that information plus information that we gathered for him. He's put that together, and what today we're going to talk about those scenarios. Tiaan, perhaps you could just introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about yourself so our audience know who the head of advice is.
Good morning, everybody. It's so good to be here. Thank you, Louise. I'm really looking forward to this morning's session. My name is Louise, as mentioned, is Tiaan Herselman. I'm the head of advice at Old Mutual Wealth, and I take responsibility for all the advice that our financial planners give, along with the tools that we use in order to aid the advice to help answer financial planning questions. And my role is to take complex financial planning matters, such as which retirement option should I consider for different properties, and what does my overall retirement plan look like, and simplify that for clients. And hopefully today we can tackle some of the elements we spoke about last week, or the panelists spoke about, and simplify them for the viewers online currently.
Okay, fantastic. Just so that everybody knows, this is being recorded. So the recording is being made available to those of you who weren't available to be here today, or if you would like to share this recording with any of your family or friends, that'll be possible. We should have the recording up and out about 24 hours from now. And just to recap, the 3 options that we are looking at is if you decide to remain in your primary residence, the residence that you currently have, and you don't move into a retirement community, what does that scenario look like, and some of the costs that you could expect in that sort of plan. The second one is if you move into it, what we would consider quite a traditional retirement community with the lifestyle offerings, where you are buying into a sectional title development. Or the third is whether you have a similar offering, but you're buying into a Liferight retirement option. And then we've also included a freehold home. So perhaps you would like to sell the house you have and move into a more secure area. So Tiaan, I think let's get going. You're the man of the hour. So over the next 30 minutes, let's be enlightened.
Perfect. Can I ask you a favor, Louise, and just confirm that when you can see my screen? Let me start sharing.
I will do.
And let's get technology working in our favor. Okay, can you please confirm that you guys can see my presentation?
Absolutely, we can see it.
Okay, awesome. I'm minimizing anything else. If there's anything you want me to pause on, please do so. But yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing some financial planning insights with all of you this morning. Again, thank you for taking the time. Financial planning is my passion. And today we'll be following on, as Louise mentioned, from the previous session we had last week, whereby we looked at different retirement home options once one gets to retirement. But I think the first starting point is just quickly recapping on what are the important elements in retirement planning. Now, any retirement plan, whether you have 100 Rand or 100 million, can be broken up into 4 numbers. And these numbers are as follows. The first number is the available assets that you have in your retirement plan at your disposal. This might be your pension, your investments, properties, or even potentially business assets. The second number is, and probably the most important number is, what is the lifestyle you want to achieve in retirement? Today we'll focus on where would you like to live in retirement? What does that look like? And the third number is, what kind of a return can you expect on these available assets in your retirement plan? And that brings us to the fourth number, which is, well, then how long can you sustain? What is the lifespan of these assets with regards to the lifestyle that you'd like to sustain? Now, we can work out any one of these 4 numbers as long as we know what the other 3 are. So as an example, if I knew somebody had 10 million Rand to invest, they were drawing an income of 50,000 a month, they'll be getting a return of 10% per year, I could then calculate how long the money could potentially last. Or I could flip it the other way around. If I knew somebody wanted to sustain their lifestyle for 40 years in retirement, that's the lifespan number, I knew I could achieve a return of potentially 10% per year, and I knew they wanted 40,000 Rand per month. I could then calculate the first number, which is how much capital or how big should the asset pool be for them to sustain this lifestyle. And today we'll look at all of these 4 numbers as a button. And the button that you push for each one of these numbers has an impact on your overall retirement plan. Now, it's important to note that the buttons in my plan will be different to the buttons in Louise's plan. And all of us have our own sets of buttons. And with these different buttons, we have a whole bunch of underlying assumptions, such as taxation, inflation rate, different vehicles, etc., which we'll look into today. But at the end of the day, we believe at Old Mutual Wealth, it's all a balancing act. And the balancing act is starting off with what it is that you, as a retiree or potential retiree or somebody working towards financial independence, would like to achieve for your ideal retirement living. And today at the end, we're focusing a bit more on the actual property purchase options. And secondly, it's balancing this with what is possible within the realm of your retirement plan. And we refer to this balancing act at Old Mutual Wealth as integrated wealth planning. Starting any conversation we have first and foremost with what's important to you, what you'd like to achieve, and then balancing that with what's possible within your financial plan, and then also using technology to help aid this conversation. So I'm going to be showing you quite a couple of graphs today. And all I want you to focus on at home, as you're sitting there, hopefully in your pajamas or having a nice cup of coffee, is I just want you to focus on the red section at the end of this graph. And that'll show you the point in time whereby your retirement lifestyle, whatever you've chosen that to be, can no longer be sustained. So if I show you a graph with a red section, it means that at that particular point in time, the lifestyle you'd want to achieve, whether it be a certain income you'd like to fund or a holiday you'd like to fund, you can no longer fund that particular lifestyle. So if you see red on a graph today, it means one thing. That particular lifestyle, whether it be an expense, so your petrol costs, your groceries, your levies, your rates and taxes, or whether it be a capital goal, maybe a holiday, maybe a vehicle purchase, you can no longer fund that. And that's because of 2 reasons. The first one is if it is a capital goal, maybe a vehicle purchase, maybe a holiday, it means there's no liquid capital. And in our world, liquid capital is something like a share account, savings account, a unit trust investment, an endowment, any investment that you have that you can easily access immediately. The second thing it means is that there might be an expense. Now, again, expenses could be petrol payments, grocery payments, potentially rent if you're still renting, medical aid costs. If it's an expense, it means that you have no more liquid capital because you can draw from that at any point in time. And your pension investments also can't sustain this particular expense. So in other words, if you have a post-retirement vehicle, such as a living annuity or an annuity, you've reached the 17.5% limit at this particular stage. So that's what it means today if I show you red on one of the graphs. Now we get to the fun part, which is where we actually look at some scenario planning with a practical example. And here I've taken a client, the fictitious client, John, and you can imagine yourself as John or anybody else. And if you want, we can do the same kind of planning for you. But in John's case, he's 62 years old and he's 3 months away from this exciting journey, which is called retirement. And in John's financial plan, he's worked his entire life, and currently he's saved up an amount for his retirement plan. He has, sorry, I just need to get this off my screen. One of the panel questions came up. He has a pension fund of 10 million, and he has a unit trust investment of 2 million. Now, just as a reminder, your pension fund is what we refer to as retirement funds. And once you get to retirement, you have to make an option. You can take up to 1/3 as a lump sum, which is tax, according to certain tax tables put in place by SARS. And the after-tax amount is then paid over to you as the client. Whatever remains in the pension investment, you have to draw an income of between 2.5 to 17.5%, or you can get a guaranteed income from an insurer. We've assumed this person goes for the living annuity version, where they draw between 2.5 and 17.5%. And then a unit trust is a liquid investment. In other words, you can at any point in time submit an instruction and get the money paid into your account within a couple of working days. But now, importantly, John's retirement lifestyle, what he'd like to fund is living expenses, petrol, and other costs that he needs to fund every month of 30,000 Rand per month. And we assume this increases with inflation, which is 5%. We've assumed he also has to fund medical aid of 5,000 Rand per month, increasing in inflation plus 4. So it's a 9% increase year on year. He also wants to fund vehicle purchases of 400,000 Rand every 7 years from age 62 till 76. So it's 62, 69, 76. And he wants to go on annual holidays for 20,000 Rand per month. So these are all after-tax amounts that he needs to fund. Then looking at his current property, it's worth 3 million Rand, or we assume that's the amount he'll get after estate agent commission if he were to sell it. He originally bought the property for 1.2 million. And because of this, because the gain is not more than 2 million Rand, he won't pay any capital gains upon selling this property. And he's currently contributing or has to pay 1,500 Rand per month for rates. This is a freehold property that he currently has. And now we get to John's first scenario where we look at what does this retirement plan look like currently. Now, to first get to the first picture, we have to understand what's happening in the background. Now, as I've mentioned, these living expenses, we've assumed that they will be funded by his pension investment after he's taken the lump sum. So he'll be drawing 2.5% from his living annuity investment after taking the 500,000 out. If the 2.5% is not enough to fund those expenses, we'll take the balance from his liquid capital, which now includes also the 500,000. If that's depleted, we'll go back to the pension investment and increase this drawdown over time up to 17.5%. But we have to keep in mind that this liquid capital also needs to fund other vehicles and holidays. Now, we've made quite a conservative assumption. We've assumed that he gets a conservative return of inflation plus 2 to 3, which is 7.5% per year on his capital. And that puts his initial financial plan at age 70. Now, this came as quite a bit of a shock to John, who's always been a diligent saver. And the first question we have to answer is, what is happening in the background of this financial plan? Well, upon closer inspection, if we go into the detail, you'll see these little blocks on the graph are all of those capital goals, the vehicles and the holidays that we need to fund. And we put them as little blocks. You see there's one vehicle purchase of 562,000 later on. But that gets funded by his liquid capital, the light blue shade on this graph. The big block is the retirement capital, the big purple block. But we are depleting this liquid capital very quickly in his current financial plan. And we need to understand, why is this happening? Well, to answer that, it's due to the fact that we are only drawing 2.5% from that retirement investment, or as we refer to it as a living annuity. And that income is represented by the light blue line, and the dark blue line is his expenses in retirement plus tax. And the difference between the amount he needs to fund and the amount he's getting from the living annuity is funded by his liquid capital. That's why it runs out so quickly. And once it's depleted at age 70, we have to now increase the money we take from his pension investment. And now we can see the two lines following each other nicely until age 78, where we reach the legislative limits of 17.5%. So in his initial financial plan, it means that he can sustain his income up until age 78, those expenses, the living expenses, the medical aid, and the rates and taxes. However, from age 70, he can no longer travel or purchase his third vehicle at age 76. So he's now in a scenario, and as one of our presenters mentioned last time, where he is asset rich but cash poor. So he has no liquidity in his financial plan. So he can fund those living expenses till 78, but from age 70 onwards, there's no more liquid capital for emergencies or for his vehicle purchases or for any holidays. So there's only 4 numbers in a financial plan. So his 4 numbers looks as follows. The first one is the investments are worth 10 million Rand. His property is worth 3 million. So his asset base is worth 13 million. The second number, the lifestyle, we pointed out, he needs to fund living expenses, medical aid, rates, and also holidays and vehicles. Now we assume that the medical aid goes up at inflation plus 4, which is 9% per annum. We've made a very conservative assumption on the return, inflation plus 2 to 3, and that gets us to our 4th number, which is the lifespan of age 70 for the goals, the income, and the holidays. However, he can sustain his income all the way up until age 78. But past age 70, as the red section shows you on the graph, he has no access to liquid capital. Now, the first thing he might ask is, well, what if we targeted a higher return? What if we repositioned the portfolio to have a bigger exposure to growth assets such as equities? And what impact would a higher return have on his financial plan? So what we're going to do now is do some scenario planning. And you'll see that we have this current scenario, which is our starting point. And now I'm going to create a brand new scenario with the help of technology at Old Mutual Wealth. And we are now going to call this our retirement scenario. And the only number we're going to push here, the button, is the return number. So what if we didn't target inflation plus 2 to 3%? What if we targeted a higher return, inflation plus 5 to 7? So in simple terms, we go from 7.5% return to 11% return. And we achieve that through the introduction of equities over the long term. That takes the plan up to 72. So at least now he can fund some additional goals in terms of holidays and vehicles till 72. But the good news is he can now fund his income till age 101. But he still has a problem in that past age 72, he has no more liquid capital. So that unit trust investment of 2 million plus the 500,000 Rand that he took out, that is depleted again here at age 72, which means past this point, there's no more holidays, no more vehicle purchases. But there is now significantly more capital, but he still has this liquidity problem. And now the first question, it's something often overlooked in financial plans, is how do we fix this liquidity issue? Now, in John's plan, he has 2 probable assets. The first one is his property, which we're not going to look at this stage. We'll get to that in a bit later. But once he gets to retirement, he has one opportunity to move capital from his retirement funds up to 1/3 into the liquid pot. He can also choose to potentially draw less from his liquid capital and more from his retirement funds. So if we do that now in this scenario, and we tell the model to only make 2 changes, take this particular scenario, and once he gets to retirement, don't draw just the tax-free amount of 500,000, draw R1 million and pay a bit of a speeding fine to SARS. And that speeding fine in simple terms on the R1 million is roughly 117,000 Rand in tax. So he gets out 883,000 Rand after tax, which is now liquid. That's the first thing we do to improve liquidity. The second thing we do is increase our drawdown from our retirement funds from 2.5 to 6%. And now all of a sudden, all of the red on the graph disappears. And now we have a lot more liquid capital shown by the light blue graph over here. And we give our liquid capital more breathing space. So what we've done now is we've given John more access to liquid capital. And now in his financial plan, which didn't cost him 1 cent to do this, the only thing he had to do was pay a bit of a speeding fine to SARS to get the money out. And this takes him now to age 101. So in simple terms, he can now fund his vehicle purchases all the way till age 78, 79. He can fund the holidays, and he can fund all of his income expenses. So the living expenses, the medical aid, the rates, all the way to age 101. And this is why liquidity is so important in financial planning. All of the money in the retirement funds that he currently has, every 1 Rand that he draws is fully taxable. So by getting some more liquid capital out, not only does it give him more capital to fund the vehicle purchases and the holidays, but he can also draw more tax efficient income from this capital, excuse me. But something we often overlook in retirement planning, and some of our presenters mentioned it last week, was Frail care. So as we get to the retirement home purchase a bit later on, which I'll get to shortly, Frail care is often not included in that, although some of them do give you a discounted rate for it because they've partnered with certain providers. But what is the impact if we add Frail care in this particular scenario from age 85 to 90? So we've assumed that at age 85, for 5 years, from 85 to 90, we are going to be adding in Frail care of 10,000 Rand per month to this financial plan. And we've assumed that this increases at 8% per year. So you'll see here I'm adding Frail care as an additional after-tax expense that I need to fund from age 85 to 90. And that takes my financial plan from age 101, my retirement plan, to age 97. It basically reduces longevity by 4 years. In other words, we have 48 less income payments whereby he can fund his retirement lifestyle. Another thing often overlooked in retirement planning is the impact of the medical aid escalation rate on a financial plan. Now, I think most of you probably do have access to a medical aid, and you'll notice the increase year on year is not 5%, or currently inflation is sitting close to kind of between 4 and 5%. It normally increases more than that. But I thought I would take a moment just to illustrate the impact of reducing the medical aid escalation rate from 9% to 7%. So going from inflation, which is 5 plus 4, 9, to inflation plus 2% being 7. Now again, our starting point here is our plan is going to age 97. And the only assumption that I'm going to change now in the scenario planning is reducing the escalation rate on the medical aid from 9% down to 7%. So only a 2% less escalation year on year. Now, as a base point, we were going till 97. Now we go all the way up until age 105, which is very healthy for a retirement plan. So that one change, just the medical aid escalation rate, reduced or added 7 years worth of longevity to the financial plan. So if we can control just one variable in the plan, which is the medical aid escalation, it adds an additional 7 years to the plan, which in simple terms is 84 additional income payments in retirement that he can fund for medical aid, living expenses, and also the rates and taxes on his current property. So let's look at the plan now, again, the 4 numbers, after we've had the first set of trade-offs. Now, our capital is now, investments is 9.83 because we've taken quite a big lump sum of 1 million and we've paid a bit of a speeding fine to SARS. But again, we did that to improve liquidity. We still have the property of 3 million and we now increased our drawdown from our retirement funds, post-retirement, to 6%, putting less pressure on the liquid capital. Our lifestyle, we've kept the same. The only difference is we've added Frail care into the mix as well. And the return required, we've now modeled inflation plus 5 to 7, a more balanced-like portfolio. So you can think of a balanced fund would be similar to this kind of return. And that got us to age 97. But now we're going to look at the retirement living scenarios on this plan, which we have a baseline for. And here we're going to look at 4 different options. The first option, as Louise mentioned, is a sectional title. Now here we've assumed that we spend 2.5 million once off. Our levies are roughly 2,000 Rand per month, which we have to cater for with inflation. The rates are 500 Rand. And this option does give us the benefit that the property will increase over time. There will be some capital appreciation. The second option, which is a freehold, not in an estate. So in this case, John would like to go purchase a property somewhere close to the coast. It's not in a lifestyle estate, and this would cost him 4 million Rand. There'll be no levies because he doesn't have a body corporate. However, we will have to plan for maintenance. I've assumed there's 1,000 Rand a month for odds and ends, paint, wear and tear, and the upkeep of the property. The rates remain at 1,500 Rand. This option does give him, again, capital appreciation and the option to sectionalize or downscale in future. The third option is the Liferight purchase. Here we assume that he purchases a 2-bedroom place for the remainder of his life and his partner. That's going to cost him 2 million Rand. The levies will be roughly 2,500 Rand per month, and the rates 500 Rand. Now, this option is very important to keep in mind that there's no capital appreciation. In other words, in most cases, he'll only get the 2 million Rand back without any growth or increase in property value once he passes away, or his estate one day once he passes away. And he also has no option to sectionalize here. And the last option is staying at home. An option that I was quite intrigued by last week listening to one of the speakers. And in this option, we've assumed that he would still spend 150,000 Rand once off for some general maintenance, things he never got to while he was working on his existing property. The rates will stay at 1,500 Rand. And then we've assumed that the assisted living costs that he's going to incur from month one is 2,500 Rand. And these are all the services that the previous presenter in the previous session referred to. And I've assumed that he spends 2,500 Rand. And importantly, we've assumed this increases with 8%, inflation plus 3. Why? Because at a later stage, he might take on more services, which means this value will potentially increase over time. We've also assumed that because of him staying in his property, he could possibly rent out a portion of the property to somebody else for 8,000 Rand from age 75 onwards. Now, again, this option does give him capital appreciation, so his property will increase in value over time, and he can potentially sectionalize or downscale in future. So let's now look at all 4 of these options and the impact they have on John's retirement plan. Now, let's look first at the sectional title option. Now, in all of these scenarios, he's going to dispose, or for the first scenario, he's going to dispose of his existing property. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to assume that I have my baseline scenario. I'm creating a brand new scenario for the sectional title. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tell the model to dispose of my property. There's no capital gains tax implication because, again, my gain is less than 2 million. So I'm going to dispose the property, and now my plan is going to shoot forward because now I have all of this additional capital. But hold on, I still have to spend another 2.5 million on purchasing my sectional title. So I'm selling for 3, I'm buying for 2.5. But what I also have to do now is increase my levies, which I previously weren't paying on my freehold property. So I take my levies, I increase that to 2,000 Rand a month, and I'm going to reduce the rates and taxes because it's a much bigger property to 500 Rand. And that now takes my retirement plan to age 101. So compared to my baseline of 97, it adds 4 years. The next option is buying the freehold property, which is not in retirement estate, but buying his dream mansion at the sea, if you can call it that. Now, again, in this case, I'm going to create a brand new scenario. My starting point is age 97. And here I'm going to now call this my freehold scenario or freehold property. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to dispose of my property. So we assume that John gets a buyer for his property. I'm getting in the capital amount of 3 million. Again, there's no capital gains tax implication because of the base cost or the gain being less than 2 million. But now I'm going to end up spending 4 million. And this is quite a big expenditure, especially in his liquid capital on his plan. That takes him back to age 85, but I also have to plan for maintenance on this property. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to add an additional amount here for maintenance, which is 1,000 Rand per month going up with inflation. And that takes this retirement plan back from 97 all the way till age 82. So for this particular option to work, John is going to have to cut down on some of his expenditure or potentially his travel or his vehicle payments for this to be a viable option. And based on the amount he has to spend, it probably isn't viable if he wants a retirement plan that can reliably and with a high chance of success get him past age 90. Now we get to the third option, the Liferight option. An option that a lot of people try to get to, and there's a lot of waiting lists for this particular option because it is very popular in retirement. Now again, in this option, I'm going to create a new scenario based off my retirement scenario where I've gone to age 97. That was the baseline of my retirement plan we agreed to. And I'm going to call this the Liferight purchase option. So again, my starting point in the retirement plan we built is age 97. I'm now again going to assume I sell my property. Now you can see my plan goes off the chart because I've just inserted a big amount of capital, but I have to now spend 2 million Rand to purchase my Liferight. And that'll give me use of the property and the facilities up until my passing. That gets me to age 109, but I do still have to plan for the levies, which one of our speakers mentioned last week. And this is normally in the region of 2,500 Rand for a 2-bedroom property. And that gets you access to all of the facilities, and I reduce my rates and taxes to 500. So this gets me to age 105. So my starting point, 97, 105, it adds 8 years to the overall longevity. And again here, because I'm releasing capital and in essence, downscaling in this particular scenario. And then the last one is the age at home option. Now, this one I want to disclaim that the assumptions can vary quite a lot. The assumption that I've made is you'll be starting on an expenditure of 2,500 Rand per month, increasing at 8%. So in this case, we are not disposing our existing property, we're keeping it. So I'm going to again copy my retirement scenario. That's going to be my baseline where I'm going to age 97. And I'm going to call this my age at home scenario. Now, I'm not disposing of my existing property. I'm keeping that. But what I am doing here is I'm spending 150,000. I've called it a purchase, but it's just expenditure once off for some maintenance and odds and ends at home. That takes me down 1 year. And then secondly, I need to also plan now for the additional expenditure of the assisted living expense, sorry, my apologies, of 2,500 Rand per month. And I've assumed that this increases at 8% every year. That takes me down to 87. However, the further assumption in this scenario was that at age 70, I would rent out a portion of my property. In this case, I've assumed 10,000, not 8,000 as mentioned earlier. And that gets me to age 93. So this option does take me back. But again, the important assumption here is the 2,500 Rand for the assisted living in the age at home scenario. So if we now summarize these 4 scenarios, the sectional title gets me to age 101. If I were to buy a sectional title, sell my home, and the reason being I'm freeing up quite a bit of capital. The second option is the freehold option, where I purchase a big property for 4 million. However, this really puts a lot of strain on my retirement plan. And I am going to have to look at some other trade-offs if I want this plan to at least go to age 90 plus. The third option is the Liferight. Now again here, I'm again releasing a bit of capital because my property is worth more than what I'm purchasing for. And that gets me up to age 105. And the last option, the assisted living, where I'm renting out for 10,000 Rand per month from age 75 onwards. I'm spending 150,000 now for some maintenance of my existing property. My rates stay the same, but I'm spending 2,500 Rand, assumed to increase at 8%. Now, it's important to note, every scenario has its own set of assumptions that we'll be putting in here, and yours might be the same. One assumption that makes a big difference here is the 8% escalation and the 2,500 Rand as a starting point. If I reduce the escalation rate, which might be accurate for somebody else, that brings this scenario, option 4, much closer to option 3 and option 1. But I think based on the initial numbers, the freehold option for this particular client, based on the amount that he's wanting to spend, doesn't make a lot of sense. So let's quickly recap where we started off this journey. I had my initial financial plan, the starting point when I spoke to John, go till age 70. That's when I had no more liquidity, although I could sustain my income to age 78. We then took on a bit more risk, introduced some more equities, we targeted a higher return, and that got us to age 72 for capital goals, but we could sustain our income until age 101. We then sorted out our liquidity problem by taking a bigger drawdown and drawing more from our retirement funds, taking strain off the liquid capital. That got us, it made a 29-year difference. And that is why liquidity is so important in post-retirement planning. That got us to age 101 for income and capital goals. We then added Frail care from 85 to 90. That took us back 4 years. We then considered the impact of lowering the medical aid escalation rate. That took us from age 97 to age 105. It added 8 years. And now for all the other scenarios, I'm going to benchmark it off step 3, the frail care scenario. The sectional title, we looked at that. That got us to age 101, so added 4 years from age 97 to 101. The freehold property took us back quite a bit, 25 years, because of the big capital amount we had to spend. That got us to age 82. The Liferight purchase got us to age 105, added 8 years again because we were actually releasing capital because of the sale of our existing property. And then lastly, the age at home option got us to age 93, taking 4 years off the retirement plan we initially put together. So in closing, there is no, and I really want to emphasize this, there's no right or wrong answer when deciding what your ideal retirement living scenario looks like. Each person's scenario will be unique and your circumstances will vary. However, I think it's of utmost importance that we ensure that whatever option you opt for your particular retirement plan, you consider all of the implications and possible trade-offs for that particular scenario. Don't go into something without having run your own numbers, having done your own scenario planning. And the importance of liquidity is so often overlooked in financial planning. Make sure that at all potential efforts, you are not asset rich, but cash poor in a time where you might have some unplanned expenses, specifically relating to medical expenses. And then ensure that your retirement plan caters for a lot of hidden costs. And we discussed medical inflation and the possible need for frail care, which is often overlooked in a lot of retirement plans we see out there. And most important of all, ensure that you partner with a financial planner that understands you, your circumstances, and that can provide you with the correct framework to make an informed decision. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for giving me the time. And I'm looking forward to having a bit of a conversation now with Louise. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tiaan. So, sure, it's a lot of information, but I have to commend you on how clear you've shared that information and the clarity in the way in which the tools you've used to share it with us. So we've had a few questions in the chat coming in there. I just wanted just to clarify with regarding to the points of price or the costs for the properties. We have based those property costs on our part one of our particular scenario. I mean, the retirement communities are vastly different, but representing the freehold, or the sectional title community, we had central developments, and the prices for their for a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom unit in a quite upmarket estate that they do, we used Waterkloof Marina as an example, was around the 2.5 million rand mark. Down in KwaZulu-Natal, we used the example of Windenham Retirement as the Liferight. There, a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom was costing just under 2 million. The 4 million rand estimation is based on a general pricing point. Obviously, the Western Cape properties, mansions in the Western Cape are going to cost you slightly more than 4 million rand, that's for sure. But similarly, for 4 million rand in other parts of the country, you could probably find something quite lovely. So if there are any specific questions, or as you can see by Tiaan's system that he has in place, that we can adjust those entry points prices and be able to pull out information that's relative to you. The second question that we also had coming in, and though you might, if it needs to be deferred, please let me know, Tiaan. A question came in earlier about, could you explain the wrapper concept and methods of using this product in an Old Mutual Wealth life wrapped investment?
Sure.
I'm not sure if that's something you would be able to assist us with for Nick.
I'm happy to explain that. So basically, we have different vehicles if you're investing, and the life wrapped option is normally for people with a higher tax rate. So if you fall between, we normally say the 30% and upwards. Now I would look at what is we refer to it as the effective tax rate. And that means that even though I fall into the 45% bracket or 40% bracket post-retirement or even pre-retirement, what is the effective tax that I'm paying? So if I'm earning 20,000 Rand a month, I'm paying 2,000 Rand tax. It means that even though I fall into the 18% bracket, I'm effectively paying 10% tax. The life wrapped option gives you the benefit in that you actually give the capital to the insurance provider, being Old Mutual, Sanlam, or whoever investment provider you use, and then all the interest and capital gains are taxed at a rate of 30% in the structure. So the insurer takes on that tax liability. There's no tax in your hands, and we limit the tax that SARS can normally charge to 30% for that particular product. It also does give you the benefit that if you were to pass away, there's a life assured. So that then passes on to one of your beneficiaries, so you don't pay executors fees as well. However, I would just note that post-retirement, very few people are in such a high tax rate that they would use the life-wrapped investment. We normally see it used quite a lot for people pre-retirement when they are earning more, because normally people's incomes do decrease in retirement. You normally go from a 40% or 45 to a 20% bracket, because now you're not earning as much income and you have different income sources. So the income you draw from your liquid investments is not as tax inefficient as the income you draw from your pension fund. So that's basically the mechanics of a life-wrapped investment, often referred to as an endowment, whereby the tax liability is limited to 30% within the vehicle, and that's paid on your behalf by the investment provider you choose to take it with.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask you, in our scenario, it's quite best case to a certain extent. And, with the interest rates going down, as we've seen in the last sort of specifically to the past COVID or before the COVID period, that's hit our retirement community quite hard in the returns that they are getting from their retirement investments. How do you factor in these? You have a plan, and I'm sure many of us had a plan in 2019. 2020 has radically adjusted that plan, and 2021 some more. So if you have a scenario plan that is currently in action, how do you account for these potential losses that you're now experiencing?
Yeah, so I think 2 points. The first one is that our assumptions are quite conservative in these plans. We built a lot of back end and almost additional fat in terms of our tax assumptions, etc. So we always make sure whatever plan we do is a conservative plan. So I mean, we saw especially during COVID when the markets took a big hammering. We cautioned a lot of clients, and the first thing we did was say, let's look at your plan and let's not make any hasty decisions. So our first starting point to your question is you always look at the plan and how does that affect it. What I would recommend, though, is that the worst thing you can do, especially in a low interest environment, is stay away from growth targeted investments, especially if you're drawing an income of 4 or 5%, and that needs to keep up with inflation. Now, there are different elements we can look at, which is what spread of assets will give us most reliably a return of inflation plus 2, 3, 4, 5%. And if we see in the last while that, look, there's really been a hammering on the local front, we've seen a lot of offshore investments doing relatively well. We will then look at the spread and potentially put more of the assets offshore. Okay. In the last kind of 3 or 4 or 5 years, you've seen offshore investments doing extremely well compared to the local front. And it's not just been because of rand weakening. The rand actually came back quite nicely last year and a bit. But we also have to remember that before that, 2009 till 2014, we saw our local market do extremely well. So the way we look at that, to answer your question, Louise, in a simple manner, is we are always looking at the strategic asset allocation, in other words, the blend of assets that will most reliably over time give us a return that you need. The other thing we have to factor into account in a retirement plan, which I didn't touch on too much, not to make it too complex, is the impact of volatility once you retire. So what that means is the journey of my investments as soon as I hit retirement, the upward and downward movements in value could have a big impact early on that I experience on how long I can sustain my income drawdown. And there's various methods and portfolios we put together, and we call them smooth portfolios, whereby during the good years, we take some of the cream, we put it away, so that once we have this rocky start, such as a COVID-19 environment, there's no big significant drop in your portfolios. So we do have various mechanisms to help cope with that. Looking at the blend of assets we invest into, but also how do we manage volatility over the short term, which is, in simple terms, the upward and downward movements of our investment values.
Thank you. So please excuse this question if it comes across ignorant. I
No,
might be ignorant here. So, if liquidity is the number one game changer, and you don't have an initial investment of 10 million from a retirement annuity or a retirement plan that you've put together in your younger years because of a misspent youth or whatever it might be, would it be advantageous then to try and get as much liquidity out of your property as possible? So, if you're in that situation, then it's downscale quickly. Would you advise that, or are there too many factors that come into play?
Look, I think there are a lot of factors. So the one thing I wouldn't just recommend is just selling your property, overnight. I think you'd have to, again, I would put together a plan and look at the various elements. The one thing I can see, or what we see, is a lot of people end up getting to retirement with kind of a 50-50 split in most cases, whereby they have 50% of their capital in property, whether it be their primary or maybe even a second property, and 50% in retirement assets. I do think there is a trade-off to be made that, look, should I consider downscaling? But there might be an emotional attachment to that. Or should I consider maybe taking a bigger lump sum from my retirement investment? Or it could be a case of, look, I haven't even started saving yet. Which is the most efficient vehicle for me? Should I go into the retirement annuity, which gives me a lot of tax break from SARS, but once I get to retirement, every R1 I draw is fully taxable? Or do I go into a life-wrapped investment I mentioned earlier, or do I go into unit trust? And I think all of these, again, it's that balancing act. All of these factors together, those buttons that I push, will dictate the answer. But I'm very scared to just say downscale. You might even have a property that's giving you a good return on investment. So you might have a property which you spent R1 million on, it's giving you an income of 10, 15,000, probably unlikely, but that might be the case. In that case, getting a rental income could be more beneficial in your particular circumstance. That's why we have to look at all the different buttons in your financial plan to not just say downscale or invest. Let's look at the implications and the pitfalls in your plan and how we can deal with that. The one thing I would just err on is just not to get in a scenario whereby your only source of income is a monthly cash flow, because it really does limit you if you have unplanned expenses in retirement.
And then we've now hit our 45 minutes, but just one last question. It seems to be, as you mentioned earlier, that, you know, based on the numbers, that a Liferight option looks very good on paper, and it offers a lot of sort of emotional securities for both yourself and your partner. But as we've mentioned, there are many queues, and often it's quite time consuming to get into a Liferight. You know, you have to be on a list and you wait and whatever. So how can you do you then look at your planning as if you're aging at home for a portion of that time and then moving across into your Liferight unit? And how does that scenario affect the sort of robustness of your plan?
It's a great question, Louise. I particularly like that scenario because it gives you flexibility. The age at home scenario, what I really like about that, and that's why I wanted to just disclaim, based on the assumptions you use, that scenario could look much better. Okay, I just made a very conservative assumption of 2.5 going up at 8%. But what I like about that scenario is that if you are on a waiting list for a Liferight, it does give you the option to get some of the services you potentially would have gotten from them. The traveling services, the nursing aids that they provide, etc. Maybe some of the maintenance that you would have had to done in your property, somebody to come help you fix the door. I like that because it's not a very capital intensive scenario. You might be only spending a fixed monthly amount for 2 years, and then now you can afford to have the Liferight option. So I really do like that in terms of the fact that it gives you a lot more flexibility. If you've made up your mind in sectional title, you know, go for it, and that's great. But if you really on a waiting list for a Liferight option, I do think that the age at home scenario gives you more flexibility, because I think the worst thing, and speaking from personal experience with a relative who passed away, it does become difficult managing a property in your old age. And we see it a lot with clients as well. And that's why I really like the age at home scenario, from having that flexibility while I possibly transition into a Liferight option.
Thank you so much. We have a few questions that have come up more in the chat. We will share those questions with Tiaan so you can answer them directly, but I think we've covered a fair amount. I hope that this session has given you some insight and understanding and will assist you with your scenario planning, you know, especially as things are changing consistently and all the time, and you know, the things that are going on. For those of us that this has been a bit of a wake-up call, I think we're going to be Googling retirement planning, fast-track retirement planning to get to that 10 million before, as time ticks by. But as I mentioned before, this is a 2-part series. So those of you who missed the first part, we will send that out again, and this is the second part. And please feel free to share any further questions with myself or Jamie, and we will really pass them on to Tiaan and get the best possible assistance that you need. Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Tiaan, for putting in all that effort for us to create this scenario planning and for us to have a better understanding of what our options are. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you very much.